And with that, I will officially welcome us to this huddle with a particular thanks to UC and Paul, who, as this question continued to come up from different fellows, a question or a grappling or showing leadership in different ways with, as the federal policy landscape has dramatically shifted and really thrown a wrench in a lot of fellows who do use policy as a lever to get to the kind of structural change that they're working on. It's really thrown a wrench in a lot of fellows' plans, and so Paul has been an example of how the different levels and creative approaches that people can take to policy change. And the folks on this call, Michelle, Alexa, Janelle, you all do great work in this, and the intention of this conversation is not to position one expert, as Paul so beautifully said in jest earlier, like you should be running this call. Like the goal is to have UC give us some context as someone who is focusing a huge part of her PhD on policy change, and for Paul to just color in one part of this puzzle, but hopefully the questions and the insights about, once we get about halfway through the hour, if we can get to a place where we're just sharing questions and insights, and I will help us do that, as will UC. But the goal is just to see what we can learn from each other in the hour. So with that, I will just encourage one last sort of logistical housekeeping thing. I'm sharing in the chat our briefing that I sent. I will capture some notes and takeaways as we go and share this back at the end. And also just encourage you all to share either in the document or in the chat questions or reactions as you go along. We're sharing the mic with a lot of people, so to the extent that we can use the chat as a tool to capture reactions and questions in real time, that's very much welcome. So with that, welcome to our shared digital home for the next hour. UC, I wonder if you might share a little bit, ground us in a little bit of framing and context, and then we'll kick it over to Paul.
There we go. Brittany, thank you so much. And Ashoka's wealth is in its fellows, in the experiences, insights, and meta learnings that we can create together. So I think the huddles are a fabulous way to do that. Just briefly about me, and then we'll go around and introduce ourselves. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of New Hampshire, looking at social entrepreneurs and how they change public policy and what effect that has on their organization. Within the social change community, often policy change is seen as the holy grail, whether it's getting funding or whether it's creating performance standards and other contracting mechanisms, or just getting out of the way and letting social change organizations do their good work. But how does that happen? Are there tensions within an organization? Previously, I worked at citizen schools, which engaged volunteers in the after-school time within middle schools in low-resourced communities. And our model was the megaphone of change. So we would prove what works, grow what works, and then change policy, change the system. And I think a lot of social entrepreneurs view that demonstration project, pilot project, and then organizational growth, and then system change as a way to really change the environment in which we're operating. So I'm curious what that megaphone looks like within this community here. I also ran a social innovation center at UNH that bridged our policy and our business environments. So, Brittany asked to set a little context. I think I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. It's clear we're living in a disrupted environment, certainly in the U.S. and even globally, and whether that's in food systems, in affordable housing, in health more broadly, in gender justice, with Promundo Global, we're seeing it rock the country, rock our discussions. I think what Paul can speak to after our introductions is how organizations like Rock USA or other social change organizations can pick their battles to be effective, whether it's at the federal level or sort of very broad levels, where it makes sense to put those energies. And then also to find where the lower hanging fruit is in state or local policies, in different types of policy, whether it's direct funding or market enabling regulation, and other types of policy, or even to go to the private sector and outside of public policy in order to grow our missions and change models. So really rich discussion here. I'd love to see who's on the call, and with your name, organization, role, and how your organization interfaces with the policy world. Is it part of your core mission? Is it, are you seeking funding? Are you seeking policy alignment with your operations or on behalf of your constituents? What does policy work mean to you? And then also, finally, what brings you to the call today? Going clockwise on my screen, Alexa, would you kick us off there?
Sure. Hi, my name is Alexa Hassink. I work at Promundo. We are a nonprofit organization. I'm based in Washington, D.C., but actually that started about 20 years ago in Brazil. Our core mission is to engage men and boys as partners with women and girls for gender equality and gender-based violence prevention. So we work both domestically in the U.S. And also have partners in over 40 countries around the world. I'm here on behalf of Gary Barker, who's a fellow, who's our president and CEO, that's currently in one of those countries. So he's in Lebanon for one of our research launches. Really happy to join you here. I am a senior communications and advocacy officer. And as far as interfacing with policy for us, we often think about our advocacy work on kind of the level of working in UN spaces, working with donors, and then also working to provide technical assistance to partners on national policy advocacy change. I think given the current environment in the US, we felt kind of mission-driven and compelled to do a bit more policy advocacy within the US space, but we work across a variety of issues, from engaging men to support women's economic advancement, to prevent gender-based violence, working with youth, and also do a lot of work and advocacy work around men's unpaid caregiving. But yeah, thank you for having me today.
One of the bits of your bio, Alexa, that popped out at me was the use of amplifying research in the policy space, and that's certainly a critical role for social change organizations who have that experience, who often invest in the evaluation and research that should have a role in policy decisions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Michelle?
So I'm Michelle Nishan. I'm the founder and CEO of Wholesome Wave. We founded in 2007 based on the belief that underserved consumers, people struggling with poverty, actually had a desire to feed their families well, but the single biggest barrier preventing them from doing that was lack of affordability rather than geographic access, which still kind of reigns as the predominant perception regarding what the barriers are to healthier food choices. So we broke those barriers by raising private money to do things like double federal food assistance like SNAP when spent on fruits and vegetables, first in farmers markets, then in grocery retail stores, and really tried to use that as a demonstration project of what would happen if federal dollars were spent differently rather than restricting SNAP. What if we actually incentivized a healthier food choice? And would that cause SNAP consumers to change the way they're spending the resources on food? And happily, we've been able to prove that to be true, that when you provide the incentive and affordability for fruits and vegetables, low-income consumers will buy, cook, and consume them. And that when they have access to that additional economic purchasing power, they change the way they spend some of their other SNAP dollars. So what we've seen is that a simple $10 in fruit and vegetable incentives can actually cause them to spend another $16 of their SNAP benefits towards more fruits and vegetables and other healthy food choices as well. Our data focus is always on what's important to the decision makers in policy. We had plenty of donors that offered us lots of money if we would study health outcomes with our incentive work, which we refused to do at the time because we knew the decision around SNAP benefits were not interested in health outcomes. They actually wanted to know, would SNAP shoppers ever buy healthy food if they had, if the affordability, do they even want healthy food? And there were others, because it's in the Farm Bill, that were concerned about these types of programs putting farmers in a price-taking position. Does it have a positive impact on their business and a negative impact on their business? So those are the things that we measured that eventually led to our success with policy change and seeing the food insecurity nutrition incentive go into the Farm Bill. So that's how we work. Now we have fruit and vegetable prescription programs where we're aiming at health policy, Medicaid regulations, things like that. So that's who we are. That's how we work. And our constituent is the underserved consumer.
Excellent. What brings you to the call today, Michelle? It sounds like you've had some tremendous victories over the past years.
Well, I think, we all likely have a lot to share about how to move forward in this particular environment. I think when Brittany and the team at Ashoka put out the question of, what do you think are some of the leading opportunities for discussions? I'm like, how do you operate in a disrupted political environment when your focus is trying to influence policy of any kind, whether it's federal, state, or municipal? Even corporate policy in this environment is an interesting cookie, because there are just so many odd directionals coming out of what we're seeing from this disruption. So I thought it would be a really interesting conversation, and was thrilled to see this conversation opportunity come up. So happy to be here.
Janelle, are you in a quiet space?
I think it's quiet. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. You said that you were walking along a busy street and would come back when you could. So
yeah,
yeah.
I'm kind of in a ditch right now in hopes that it's quiet, but I might not have the best signal. But anyway, so Janelle Orsi from Sustainable Economies Law Center in Oakland, and our mission is about giving communities control over their local economies by enabling worker-owned cooperatives, housing cooperatives, energy cooperatives that basically put the ownership of our economies in the local community's hands. And throughout the years, we've provided a lot of legal services and education and sort of movement building to support that, but found that at every step of the way, there are a lot and policy barriers. And so every year, advocacy at the local and state level in California to reduce barriers to housing co-ops, worker co-ops, land trusts, community currencies, local food systems, urban ag, seed sharing. And our main insight is that, oh my gosh, there's so much more work to be done at the policy level. Like literally 100,000 laws need to be changed or tweaked. And ideally it would be done at the local level by the people to whom these policies apply. And so our work has kind of shifted away from doing the advocacy ourselves directly to training everyday people to see themselves as policymakers and take initiative and spearhead campaigns. So more than just like making your voice heard on petitions and voting, but actually organizing with their community and spearheading new legislation. And one of the ways we've been doing that is by facilitating the formation of policy teams, which are kind of small, tight-knit groups of people in a certain industry or sector who get behind an issue. And so last year, I think it was Brittany, I don't know who mentioned it, that we changed the workers' compensation law in California for worker co-ops, but it was a group of 9 worker owners of worker co-ops that did that advocacy. And it was a lot of fun, and none of them had any prior policy experience, and 2 of them are just really into the policy work now. And so we consider that a victory of sort of transforming everyday people into policymakers, and we're doing that again in 2018 with a couple other groups. But overall, our big picture question is, how do we get more change makers to see themselves as policymakers and actually get out and do it?
Fantastic. And, again, in my research, when you contrast social entrepreneurs to social movements, social entrepreneurs often have that demonstration project, Michelle, the research that's been done, Alexa, and are not just, their arguments are not just based on theory and moral concepts. Truth and justice, very important. And when you can show a pilot program that works, when you have community members who can speak to their own experiences, that can create a legitimacy among the decision makers that that other forms of activism can't. So, Paul, let's pass the mic to you. You've been at this a long time and worked with policy change at a lot of different levels. You have the successes and the bruises and the failures to show for it. And if you would, take us through a little bit of your experiences and the insights, and then we'll open it up to broader discussion.
Well, overall, I'm just impressed with policy wins of the three of you. I mean, it's just amazing. Our work is much narrower in some respects, much more targeted to a very specific sector. And so big wins for us, but small relative to, an evolution of the SNAP system, for instance, or gender equality. But that said, we're in the business of helping homeowners in mobile home parks buy their parks as co-ops. I don't know if the three of you are aware, mobile homeowners own their homes but rent the land from third-party investors in roughly 50,000 mobile home parks in the country.
My brother John lives in Notasulga, Alabama.
Oh, wow.
In a mobile home park.
There you go.
Very familiar.
Yeah, right. And the Southeast is really, between Texas and the Carolinas and that whole swath of the country, the largest population of manufactured homes, for sure. This is a sector that what I mentioned to UC last week when we saw each other was this is a sector dominated by a lot of small business people and some large consolidators. When I say the business, I say manufactured home communities or mobile home parks. The largest community owner in the country is Sam Zell and a company called Equity Lifestyles, which is a real estate investment trust. So there are some very large interests and some very traditional local owners. But one thing is almost universally true. I probably shouldn't say universal, but it's a very conservative, generally white male, older white male dominated industry. Change, and very typical of many industries, it's an industry rooted in a belief that you're either with us or you're against us, which is defined as 100% with. And if you're 1% not with, then you are absolutely against, in the view of, pretty typical trade association type mentality. So as UC mentioned, we've had to walk a careful line. First off, I just wanted to say, from a strategy standpoint, Rock USA and our work in the manufactured housing sector has largely been market focused and complemented by public policy strategy, some very targeted public policies, but primarily a market-based strategy. And there's an outstanding booklet written years ago by Steve Dawson and Peggy Clark, published by the Aspen Institute and the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation. And it's out of print now, but Brittany, I'm happy to share it with you, to share with the group. It really is, and I have it here. That's why I was going to show it to you. And where is it? It is a excellent analysis, rooted in the workforce development field, but really an analysis of sectoral strategies. Steve Dawson still writes quite a bit about sector strategies in the workforce field. He was inducted into the Cooperative Hall of Fame, Janelle, so you might know Steve. But in any event, I'm happy to share that booklet with you. It's out of print, but it's phenomenal at just framing up how market-based social enterprises or nonprofits become integral to an industry sector and work for change by being a key actor within the industry. And I have taken those lessons very much to heart because of the industry we work in and the reaction that we get from private business as a nonprofit social venture, playing in this space with a very different mission, obviously. So with that said, that really informs our strategy, not necessarily what we pursue, but how we pursue it. And then I would just say too that in terms of the current state of affairs, and you play at the federal level more than I do, it seems to me that all the action is at the state level and local level, and that's going to be for the foreseeable future. So we have no federal initiatives underway at present. There is a tax credit bill that was thrown in through Representative Ellison and Senator Shaheen, but going at tax code changes through the Democratic Party in this Congress is absolutely not worth an investment of time from my perspective. But people were eager to put something in, and they did. But that said, where we are pursuing change is at the state level, and there is a notice law that has been really instrumental in several states. That is, when a community owner seeks to sell the property or goes to sell the mobile home park to a third-party investor, a right of first refusal or opportunity to purchase law, so that the homeowners have an opportunity to see that deal and match the offer and buy the property instead. That exists in 5 states today. There's an initiative underway in Minnesota this year, and the legislature comes back in session next month to pursue that. But our strategy with that, recognizing disruption really is based on your vantage point. So we are a disruptive force in the manufactured housing industry. So we have pursued this one by allying ourselves and really organizing behind the scenes. As our local affiliate says, we're organizing from the back of the bus. But that's okay, because when push comes to shove, if we are not successful, we need to still be in that marketplace and effectively finding opportunities for homeowners and doing our work. If we're successful, then great. Everybody will enjoy the success, but the downside risk of failure is so great that we really see ourselves as organizing other advocates and homeowners. To your point, Janelle, homeowners play a vital role in self-representing themselves in the legislature. So the more we can ally ourselves with the State Homeowners Association and help them get out in front, the better. So that's our, in terms of state action, an example. And in terms of federal action, it's really on the regulatory side. And that's kind of wound down now, but our last success was with USDA, and that had to do with, as I'm sure many of you have done over time, inviting key administrators to events to speak, which means they have to get educated about the subject matter. And then once they get educated and a little bit into the subject matter, then you can advise them. In this case, at USDA, some states are implementing this 504 program one way, which was friendly to homeowners in co-ops, and in other states they were denying folks. And so calling out the inconsistency and contradiction and getting the national office simply to say, no, this is the national rule. But that was just a process of regulatory change, which I greatly favor over legislative change whenever possible, just because it's real people and you can sort of make a rational argument with and help them come along. So those are just a couple of examples of ways we've pursued it within the context of this primarily market-based strategy, supported by a public policy, in targeted ways. UC, does that pick up where you wanted to?
That's great. And I certainly have questions and observations, but I think our time is best spent with Alexa, Michelle, and Janelle. Jump in. what would you like to learn more about? Where does it match or diverge from your own experiences?
So I'll go first in saying that, we work similarly as well, because it's that whole notion of, we're lucky enough to have a network of partners in 49 states now. And in those 49 states, we have programs going somewhere in a key congressional district where either somebody from an agency like USDA calls home and they go home for vacation, or Congress people that are making decisions go home and they can, to Paul's point, learn about the programs, the language of the programs, the impacts of the programs, and really helps get through, because we suffered a lot of those same inconsistencies and SNAP regulations and everything like that. I think, for me, I want to share what we're seeing and then see how that matches up with what everybody else is going for right now. Because, one of the things I've had to manage at Wholesome Wave is just, more my staff freaking out about what's happening in government. What I'm seeing, whether it's at the state level and working with governors' offices around Medicaid, RFPs and regulations, and potentially using those as innovative ways to support things like fruit and vegetable prescriptions. We're also in DC, and the interesting thing for us, the folks in the USDA, the folks in Congress that are on the agriculture committees that pass that legislation. So, our interest is in protecting the Food Insecurity and Nutrition Incentive Program, not seeing it shrink, and if anything, if there's ever a possibility of seeing it grow. A lot of those players are still the same, and it's actually right now almost an advantage to us that there haven't been key cabinet members or deputy secretaries and undersecretaries appointed, because the work is laying in the lap of these lifer folks in the agencies. They've already been there, already familiar with the programs, already in support of them. So what we're seeing with the current Secretary of Agriculture is a great desire to try to preserve the status quo for the next 5 years in this next farm bill. And also seeing something that's been very unexpected to us. For instance, Shelley Pingree, who's a congresswoman from Maine, has put up a local Farms and Food Act that includes produce prescriptions, that includes support for Food Hub, more resilient local and regional agricultural systems and things. And she has a double-fisted handful of Republican co-sponsors, some of them very conservative, who are looking at opportunities to actually push this type of legislation because they don't want to be seen as 100% beholden to the value of the current administration, that they do care about agriculture as a small and mid-sized business opportunity for their constituents, that they care about affordable access to healthy food to their constituents that are struggling with poverty. So it's kind of like interesting to see what's happening with some of these bills that are going to be going to committees soon that seem to have pretty broad bipartisan support, almost as a quest for some of these conservative lawmakers to differentiate themselves from the pack. So I'm just curious if anybody else is seeing anything like that in their local communities. I know that a lot of governors have been responding to the current administration more resistively. And I think, Paul, you guys are probably really well positioned. We're going to be moving a lot more into states because it seems like in this environment, it almost seems like at the state level is the only place any meaningful business is going to get done. I'll stop there and so that's kind of, it's what we see, but I'm wondering if we're the only ones seeing that or if you guys are getting a sense of that as well.
Yeah, with policy folks that play in policy circles a lot more than I do, that's what I hear people saying, all the actions at the state and local level, Michelle. So I think you're on to what I'm hearing a lot of people say. And it is interesting, finding that economic development argument, as you have done, as you just articulated, I think is brilliant and absolutely essential to do anything on a bipartisan basis. You know.
Yeah, and just one other point that I'll make. I also found that in this particular environment of solid Republican leadership, using the bigger numbers is really impactful. So, if we go and hold up a particular community that's seen, a few $100,000 in increased purchases at some local food hubs and food delivery, projects into underserved communities, isn't as impactful as when we actually cite studies that demonstrate, for instance, when we quantify diet-related disease at $1.4 trillion a year in treatment costs and lost productivity, that gets their attention because it's 5% of the national debt, which is all they're talking about. It's like they're using that as their justification to cut hunger relief programs internationally, et cetera. When you divide 1.7 billion against 20 trillion, a lot of zeros show up behind the decimal point on the calculator before a number shows up. But when you divide 1.4 trillion against 20 trillion, it's actually 5%, and therefore a reasonable pathway. So we found that using bigger numbers gets people's attention in the Beltway. So that's just something we've had to multiply the economic impact of our work and go after the bigger numbers. So that's just another thing that we've noticed as well, if you're going to get the Fed's attention.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. You're on mute, Yusi.
All right, Janelle or Alexa, I'm curious how this resonates with you. You're, in some ways, I think, Janelle, of working at a community and state level, to my knowledge, not operating at the federal level because of that power of cooperatives and community work. And Alexa, I think of you as operating at a global level, as well as at the lower levels. So whether in the U.S. or more broadly, is this what you're seeing as well, or with a nuance?
This is Janelle. I would say since we do work at the local and state level, we haven't really felt it as much, other than potentially even having the opposite situation where California is looking at what's happening at the federal level and thinking, we've just got to show them how it's done, and want to be a pioneer and step out there and be even more radical. I don't know if that's really going to play out, but I think there's a sense of urgency now to pass some good laws, and so hopefully we'll take advantage of that a little.
Mm-hmm.
I have another question, but yeah, go ahead and comment if you have something on that.
Oh no, Janelle, I was interested in your view of whether you see, with obviously expanding and widening, and now with the tax bill, even more widening wealth and income gap in the country and across the world. Do you see an increased interest in cooperatives and cooperative ownership outside of your normal sphere of supporters? Are you hearing from surprising people an interest in cooperative model?
Maybe. I mean, I guess there are a lot of cooperatives across the country that are in rural and conservative communities that were sort of the pioneers of it. And I think as far as the people that reach out to us, they're very much in our world and in our circles, in our movements, and we're not, well, sometimes we get contacted by libertarian groups, but I do have a sense, I just have a sense that talk about cooperatives is spreading, and more often when I bring up the word cooperative, people know what I'm talking about, and they're already thinking about it in some form or in some part of their lives. And so it's just sort of, cooperatives are in the air a lot more than I would say they were maybe 10 or 12 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask, Paul, when you get mobile homeowners talking about the policy issues, I mean, how do you, when they've been involved in any form of advocacy, what do you think it is that motivates them? Is it the tangible difference they think it'll make in their own housing arrangement? Is it just like wanting to have more power? Is it wanting to stick it to the man? Is it fun? What I'm really curious about, like, what motivates people who aren't currently like social entrepreneurs or policy advocates to get involved, and or anybody can answer that question. What have you seen that motivates people?
Well, at the community level, it's their word for it is control. You know, if our PR team had our way, right, we would say, just please say economic security, and that would be a winning argument. But for low income homeowners, the word is control. We want control over our futures, not some other third party investor coming in here and doing what they will to us.
Do you find that people will turn out? Do you have any examples of any mobile home communities where people turned out on policy issues?
Yes, a great example in Winchester, New Hampshire, which is the 7th poorest town in the state with 230 some odd towns. It's the subject of, it's the location of Ernest Hebert's a series of books, if you remember. He wrote about very poor families in southwestern New Hampshire. But in any event, 3 co-ops in that town came together to unelect, to push out of office a local selectman who was unfavorable to them, and ultimately won him over. He came to them and agreed that he would meet with them quarterly, and if they would, and be friendly to their issues if they would put him back in office the following term, which they did. So Leroy Austin got that firsthand, which is really an amazing story in a very low income place. And mobile home parks, in low income communities, mobile home parks are the lowest income neighborhoods in virtually every one of them. So.
Yeah, I have, if I can, because this is so cool because it's generative. That we hear the word in our work control as well. We want control over our own food budgets. We want better control over being able to make the decision to put healthier food on the table for our children. And the way we've actually been able to kind of couch that's resonating at the state and the federal level with conservative lawmakers is that these are the things that lead to self-reliance, which nobody argues with us when we say, when somebody actually has that little bit of additional affordability, they actually can really take care of themselves. They can take care of themselves and their family, and they're willing and they're prepared to make those decisions. They just need the trigger, and that trigger is that little bit extra of affordability that leads to that type of self-reliance. So that's, it's so funny because it's like, you hear about, and we've seen the way that the dog whistle approach works, but it's like people, finding the right words in the language that appeals to these particular lawmakers. And we've also found that some of that language is also hyper-localized too, so it's always important. So one of the benefits that we have with our distribution partners is they live in urban and rural areas, and we can go to them with the concept of taking personal control and couching it as self-reliance. And it works in most places, but there's some places where security, for instance, is probably a much better word depending on the local environment you're in. But, neat stuff.
Yeah, it's really the philanthropic community and donor community that doesn't really resonate to control, right? So we have to translate that.
Oh, yeah.
For that. That's why I say, we love
they hate when we say low-income consumer. Yeah. But policymakers love the word consumer. So when we talk to policymakers, we're talking about consumers. When we talk to the philanthropic community, we're talking about citizens.
Oops, your mic went silent or something, Michelle.
Oh, it's like the need, the need for translation.
Right.
goes, well beyond, are we speaking Somali? Are we speaking Mon Cambodian? It's like, are we speaking the right language for the right sector of people who speak perfectly good English? It's interesting, really interesting.
I'm going to flip back to Alexa for a sec, just to make sure that the notions of control, of self-reliance are incredibly salient to gender relations. And I'm wondering, in your experiences, what are the arguments that are having the most traction, and are you seeing change over time?
Yeah, I mean, just to comment, I think the language question is really interesting, both in the kind of translation and then also in what you amplify. I mean, as an advocacy-based organization also focusing on gender justice, often we face, we can't really dilute our message, but there are the different benefits and costs you can pull out for different audiences. Interestingly, we're working right now on having a roundtable in Washington, D.C. with the National Democratic Institute in January, focusing on how we really tackle gender norms in men in political positions of power, which is a topical issue, in support of gender equitable policies. So approaching it kind of from that other side as well, of kind of getting kind of in the heads of those in positions of power and tackling gender norms and dynamics in those structures. But when we're looking at, as far as kind of voices and dynamics, when we're looking at the international work, I mean, it's a similar situation of we're really trying to get those who are most affected by the issues in a position to speak to them, identify the areas that we want to push for policy advocacy. But this conversation is really interesting for me because it's a bit outside of the space we normally work in, but it's interesting for me to see kind of the connections and the differences and similarities.
I'm curious if y'all have conscious or find yourself in a particular space regard to activism versus having a seat at the table. We know that social change is most effective when there are the advocates and the activists at the gate, and when there are more moderate change makers within the decision-making structure. Where do you position yourselves, and how do you make sure that those other roles are filled among your partners?
So my favorite metaphor for this is there are tree shakers and jam makers, and so Rock USA is a jam maker, absolutely, no question about it. And we support our tree shakers. We literally donate to some of our tree shakers in terms of state volunteer homeowners associations. We, as a social venture, are probably the most supportive of any of their, quote, in the nonprofit sector. There are a lot of partners that are great partners, but everybody struggles for money, and when you get into policy advocacy, I think it's the most difficult, especially for grassroots community organizing, policy change folks. Very hard to raise money. So that's stepping up, helping them out.
Yeah, I think we have a network of over 300 community-based nonprofit organizations that are distribution and messaging partners of ours, and many of them play the role of advocate activists. We're more having the seat at the table. When I turned 18, my mom and dad, who are South Central American Farm Belt Republicans, they're no longer with me, promptly marched me down and had me register as a Republican so that I could register to vote. And I've actually maintained that registration my entire life. Simply because I moved around so much, it was just convenient to be registered that way, but then vote my conscience, which is what I always do. But what we've tried to do with all of our programming is really focus more on, does it make the people that are participating happy? Does it improve? Does it improve the economic condition of the environment where they're making their decisions? Does it have Does it have a variety of positive halo effect? What are the benefits? Really approaching it more from what are the win-wins for everybody engaged, the different stakeholders engaged, and the specific kind of advocacy we found is actually more effective at the local level. That when a lawmaker does go home, or somebody who works in an agency does go home, and they see two things. One is the program working, but then they're hearing from these organizations what's at stake if it's not supported. And the why it needs to be looked at through this human lens of either potential suffering or great potential benefit. That really resonates, because when you're working, when you're actually at the table, which is often in the middle of the Beltway or at some policy consortium elsewhere, you've got 5 to 15 minutes to make your point. And if you're saber rattling, you're immediately dismissed. So we try to put into buckets those, but deploy all of those methodologies. So I love your language, tree shakers, jam makers. We try to have space in our organization for all of that stuff to be happening without coming down hard on one side or the other.
Michelle, your audio was a little bit wonky there, but we got that.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. And Janelle, I'm curious, you must have a range of people that you work with, some who are all ready to engage in the policy space, perhaps even with an overly activist approach, and others that don't see themselves as policy voices at all. How do you work with the range of constituents?
Well, I will say one thing that we've been thinking about lately is how to work with the not usual suspects, or I guess the unusual suspects, because we've worked with a lot of policy campaigns over the years where we bring together coalitions of other organizations working in a similar space. And what we end up doing is having all these meetings where we have leaders in the room who are the same leaders who run the organizations and fundraise for the organizations, and they're tired and exhausted and they don't always show up to meetings. But when we've brought to the table people who don't have policy advocacy experience but who are interested in the issue, directly impacted by the issue, there's a different kind of energy and interest, and I think they crave the empowerment that comes from being part of that process. And so that's kind of like a major question in our mind, is how to get the unusual suspects to the table. And we even have a process right now where people are applying to be part of a new cohort of policy advocates on worker co-ops. And a couple people who applied are people who are the usual suspects, like they're worker co-op developers. They tend to be in a lot of conversations about coalition building and that kind of thing. And our goal is really to bring together a cohort and train them on worker co-op law and train them on policy advocacy. And so at this moment we're like, should we engage these folks or actually sort of hold them back and say, no, we're really trying to find people without any policy experience? I don't know. That's just a quandary we have right now.
Yeah. Interesting.
We have a few more minutes. Final thoughts or questions for Brittany to continue with in future huddles?
I think an extra 15 minutes is a good idea. So that, any of the technical stuff, and sometimes it's unavoidable for to be late, so I apologize for that. But this is actually a conversation that could be an hour and 15 or an hour and 30 minutes. Because it's like, the wheels are really kind of starting to turn. Definitely for me, I don't want to speak for anybody else on the call, but this has been terrific.
I would agree for perhaps setting up a 75-minute call. It feels like it's more than an hour conversation. The good news is that there are few of us, a few of you, so you pick up the phone or write an email to colleagues that you think would be able to continue the conversation in your own vein.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, there's certainly lots of room in 2018 as well to, choose a part of this conversation that we want to go deeper with that we didn't get to. So an invitation here, I will send this recording and the transcription to folks just for your own reference. Maybe, Paul, if you have the PDF of the booklet that you talked about, other people have other resources to share, we'll make sure that gets circulated and also share this online. And please do go with the open question and invitation if there is something we want to go further with as a group and welcoming other fellows in the new year. We're committed to making those conversations happening and to doing the legwork of getting folks in the digital room. So please do leave with that open invitation, policy-wise or otherwise. We've had huddles on being a mom and a social entrepreneur. Alexa, I'm looking at you. Gender, like intersection of gender caretaking and social change, or working in rural America, looking at the trauma-informed practices used by social entrepreneurs working with traumatized communities. All of it, it's open to you, and we're excited to host. And so grateful to you all for taking the time, especially at the end of your crunch, to digging into this. It was such a beautiful conversation.
And I think as far as policy change in a disruptive environment, we're hearing there's almost the paradoxes in the work that we're doing. We have Republicans who are towing the party line, but also wanting to differentiate themselves, and so being open in a way that perhaps might not have been formally. This idea of control, because I think a lot of us are feeling out of control, or like the system is out of control. So that becomes a really powerful message, not only to policy decision makers, but also to engaging constituents to be involved in those policy conversations in the first place. How do we get control and of our destiny as individuals, as business owners, as humans? And then engaging unusual suspects if policymaking is no longer the linear process that theorists considered it a few decades ago. How do we find those leverage points and use our work to drive that broader scale change, that holy grail? Definitely conversation to be continued. Thank you, Paul, for kicking us off, sharing your story. Brittany, of course, for engaging the fellows. And Alexa, Michelle, Janelle, so good to meet you, and best wishes in your policy advocacy in the months ahead.
Yeah.
Really and you for graceful facilitation, who I said to in the side chat was like watching Netflix. It was so lovely to watch the way you helped this conversation unfold. So thank you so much.
Terrific. Nice job, everybody. Nice to meet you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.